Hey all my devoted loyal viewers, it's video time once again, right on schedule, no delays whatsoever.
So this time I've learnt my lesson. Bi-monthly.
We are starting this one with some planning this time. Check out our new planning docs on Miro. In terms of defined goals, we've decided on focusing on a short prototype section of the first hour or two of gameplay, and we've broken down the rough plan of the level, as well as narrative and script within this section, being more of an introductory section to game mechanics and environment. Doesn't really need a lot of enemies, so we're just mainly focusing on the setting and the atmosphere, you know, that kind of stuff. Whilst that's being done, I did what I promised I'd do. I made some method of making sure level effects can't be controlled by multiple systems at the same time. To that end, I've added this item control concept, which essentially allows item controllers like this one to request control over a given item. Lights, for example, use two different types of parameters to control themselves. They have power parameters and light flicker parameters. So right now, this light's item controller has some default parameters of those types to define its default behavior. But if my cinematic event system wants to apply its own parameters and override that behavior, it makes a request to control the item. And so now, the item is using its default power parameters, but the cinematic event system's flicker parameters. But now, what if the haze system wants to make the light flicker too? Well, it has a lower priority, so it won't be able to override the cinematic event system's control parameters from being the chosen set of parameters. But as soon as the cinematic event system releases control, the haze system is still waiting for control, and so the haze system gains control and sets the light's state. I've also worked on some of the visual portion of the game, but I'm not an artist, so it's mostly effects. I want volumetric fog to be a big component of the claustrophobia, but I don't want to overuse it. So playing with it in the early stages is probably a good idea, and it's useful to figure out ways around visual bugs, like this one, caused by what I found out is temporal reprojection of the fog with high frequency light flickers. However, without temporal reprojection, the fog shadows end up looking particularly pixelated, and since we're not willing to compromise on not having realistic looking fog shadows, because they look sexy as hell, it means we're limited to not having seizure-inducing light flicker frequencies, but I suppose we can live without it. There's also some playing around with some particle effects that we're likely to be using, you know, particle smoke for detailed condensation from pipes, or steam from burst steam pipes, dripping water from above, and dust particles hanging in midair. Mostly just playing around. Anyway, you guys remember that whole spooky move while invisible object setup I had going?
Though right now it's done via a collision volume, and I should probably do it by analysing the actual screen's render data.
Probably not, you probably didn't watch it. In any case, it was a lot of setup, but I don't need to worry about it anymore because I'm doing it entirely via the magic of the custom stencil buffer. I can define an object, say this sphere, to be custom stencil index 1, and then we do a compute shader pass, grabbing the scene texture, the depth buffer, the compute stencil buffer, and the compute depth buffer. That was a lot of words. And then find all the non-zero locations in the stencil buffer, and see if it's not behind anything by comparing stencil and non-stencil depth buffers. And then compare the scene texture to see if any pixels are or are not distinguishable. For each pixel where that's true, I write a compute buffer at that stencil's index. If I want to see if an object is visible, I can slap a component on it, it sets its own stencil value, and then I grab its visibility state from the system responsible for figuring all that magic out every frame. It's not free, has some issues, but it's a lot more robust, and it should work pretty well for figuring out if, for example, any monsters are visible to the player. I'll use it for cool stuff soon, so watch this space.